You're on the Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, and exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society. And now, in Disney.
Well, it's so good to have everyone with us this afternoon. We're really glad that your presence is here with us. We've got a really good program here. We call it Jehovah's Witnesses Share Their Christian Testimony. And we have got a Christian coming in from the UK. His name is Steve, and he's going to tell us about how he exited the Watchtower and how he didn't leave God behind and became a Christian. Well, we got Anne Marie. She's a former Jehovah's Witness out of Northern California, and she's going to be interviewing Steve today. Hello, Anne Marie.
Hello, my brother Rick.
Well, there you go. Well, I'll tell you, Anne Marie, I'm getting excited. I've been working with Steve here for the last month. Finally, we got him on, and I'm really dying to hear his story. So I'm going to cut you guys loose, and I'm here if you need me.
Oh, thank you, my brother. Well, hello and welcome, Steve. I've been hearing about you and anxious to hear your testimony. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you, Anne-Marie. Glad to be here.
Oh, bless your heart. I want to thank you so much for being willing to come on and to share with all of us your story and your testimony, what you've been through, how you feel about it. You know, that's not easy for a lot of people because it's a very personal thing, isn't it, Steve?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we've all got our own different stories to tell and emotions that came along with that.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, I want to welcome everyone in on our Six Screen Sunday, Spiritual Sunday. We only get to have it every other week, usually twice a month. Today is December 18th, 2022. And boy, it almost seems like maybe, I'm not sure, the next time we have our program, it'll be 2023. And that gives me a nose up to the Watchtower who told me that I wouldn't live to grow up. And now I'm a great grandmother. And Steve, this is your story and your platform. Is it okay if I just let you tell your story in your own way, and maybe I can ask clarifying questions if I need to? Would that be all right with you, Steve?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to start from the very beginning, or how do you want to start?
Whatever is comfortable for you. Like, how did you come to be involved in Watchtower? What was life like as a believing member of Watchtower? What helped you to get out? And how did you become where you are today? Basically, that's the format.
Okay. Well, 1972 was the year that my parents got baptized. So I was 6 years old at the time. So obviously we all know that was the context of that time was the run up to 1975. I don't remember the sort of the talk that was going on at that time. As I say, I was 6 years old, you know, and coming out from the world as it was into the organization with my parents at that time. I was too young to really understand that. But it's funny, but I asked my mum a couple of days ago when I knew I was coming on here, and I asked my mum, I said, did you ever hear of people, wanting to sell their houses or anything like that? And she said, well, we did hear of that. She said, that was we often heard of that. And I said, well, did you hear of anything firsthand within the congregation that you were in? And she said that yes, there was a couple of sisters that the comments were, well, we're deciding we're going to buy a new car because we're not going to have to make the payments on it because the end of the world, the Armageddon's going to be coming soon. So that was the kind of context of the time when I was, coming into the organization as a child. I remember my last Christmas. I do remember that, and but I've got to be honest with you, Anne-Marie. The times that I reflect on as a youngster, I've only got really good memories. In fact, when I think about them, it makes me smile. I came into a congregation of about 150 publishers at that time. It was a huge congregation. The Kingdom Hall itself was shared with 2 congregations. And and there was, I don't know, there seemed like, I want to say that there was a lot more people attending meetings back then, because to me, it always seemed full. There was always loads and loads of people there, and I had lots of JW friends around my same age as me at that time. I remember I was enrolled in the theocratic ministry school at a very young age. I used to love reading. I got some fond memories of my first Bible reading. Apparently, according to my mom, I was working on gestures, and my head hardly poked up above the podium, and all they could see was my arms either side because I was working on gestures, apparently. And of course, coming down off the platform, and after the meeting, I used to get the adults coming up to me saying how wonderful it was, and you were great, and blah, 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 blah. You know, so of course, what 7-year-old wouldn't really enjoy the love bombing that I got from that? So that was a fun memory. We used to have a lot of parties. My parents held parties for me, and other parents in the congregation used to hold parties for their kids. So really good fun memories there. Like I said, there was lots of kids around about the same age as me, so always parties going on, and not just parties with children either. You know, I got memories of the congregation having parties as well. For example, I remember one of the sisters was hired a hall somewhere, and we had this barn dance, and there was food, and there was people from the congregation was there, and we had a great time. So that was a fun memory as well. My parents had really good friends. They were interesting friends as well. One brother there, he lived in this old mill, and he had a huge full-size snooker table in his loft, and he was fun to be with, and my parents went on holiday with them. And funny enough, he owned a big American car. Now you have to understand that in the United Kingdom, especially back in the early 70s, the biggest car that was on the road was probably half the size of one of the American cars at that time. And he wanted on holiday with them. He went to North Wales, and the lanes, the little roads and lanes in North Wales, you know, I mean, this big Thunderbird, I think it was that he had, was, you know.
Yeah, aren't those roads really small, kind of narrow?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the width of the tarmac was probably the width of his car.
Oh my God.
And then in the middle, you'd have grass growing up in the middle of the road, where obviously wasn't getting trodden down. And then you get the verges up either side. So he went down in this big American car, and people coming the other way cursing him because he shouldn't be bringing a big car like that down these roads. So that was fun.
May I ask you a question? I'm sorry, I guess I should have asked it earlier. I'm so sorry for interrupting. Please forgive me. May I ask you a question about your childhood? You said
Sure.
that you were 6 years old when your mother and father got baptized. Both your parents? I'm sorry, did you say both of them?
Both of them were baptized, yes, yeah.
Okay.
What happened
But
sorry, go on.
You said that you were 6 years old, and you piqued my interest because I was 6 when my mom got baptized. I was 5 when we celebrated our last Christmas. And when you said, I remember our last Christmas, and it sounded to me, if I understood correctly, that you were kind of remembering different times, happy times, not that you weren't happy in the organization as a child, because it sounds like everybody was really kind and they had parties, which personally, Steve, I have never heard any ex-Jehovah's Witness tell of anybody having parties like you are. I mean, nobody ever got to do anything. It was very strict. So do you remember life before the organization took over your family? Did you have the holidays? Did you notice that you were happy? Did you notice after your parents got baptized that maybe they got a little stricter? I just want to know if that was your experience.
No, not really. No, not at all. I don't have any, with regards to Christmas, I don't remember having any thought, well, not at this point. I shall go on it a little bit later to explain it a bit more, but at this age, I didn't have any personal problems with not celebrating Christmas. At least I don't remember having any. And like I said, my parents always used to put parties on, and so did other people in the congregation as well. So there was never any shortage of parties and things like that. So I don't remember a change.
Wonderful.
I don't remember a change. No, not like that. Not severe change. I don't remember.
Wow, that's really unusual. A lot of people say they remember things got harder and stricter. Even my mom, who was like the most loving, happy, wonderful, great mom in the world, and we were always so happy. The organization changed her. She got stricter. It was all about responsibility before Jehovah, and they put out a magazine in like 61, 62 that if a 4-year-old knows it's against the rules to steal a cookie from the cookie jar, and it's another sin to lie about it, then they're responsible for before Jehovah, a 4-year-old. And my mom told us kids that we had better behave because we would die at Armageddon. I mean, it was that bad. Now you're telling me this happy. So I'm happy you had a great experience. I'm so sorry. Steve, please go on. I'll try not to interrupt.
No, that's fine. No, but yeah, no, I can't say that I like I said, this was very early, you know, from about 6 years old up until about 10 when it started to change. But in those first few years, I've only got happy memories, really. I don't have any I didn't have any problem about not celebrating Christmas that I can remember. You know, and like I said, we had lots of times where we were, and I'm not just talking about parties and holidays and stuff like that. Even participation at the meetings as well. For example, we had a part on one of the circuit assemblies, my dad and myself, and you know, I was supposed to be watching a TV program, which was, well, I suppose you call it the equivalent of Starsky and Hutch. It was called the Sweeney, considered to be quite a violent thing. And of course, I was on the platform watching this TV program. My dad would come in and show me, and you know, this was all taking place on the platform. That I shouldn't be watching it because it's violent and all the rest of it. So, you know, part on the platform, that was good. Of course, you got love bombed all the time after that. I mean, you as a young child, I mean, getting all that praise and everything. I mean, you know, any child's going to love that. And, you know, I did, obviously. But we also I remember we used to do volunteer work as well. For example, we used to take part in preparing the food at the circuit assemblies. And again, I remember being part of the sandwich making team in one of the assemblies. It was like a conveyor belt. You'd have one person taking the bread out, one person buttering it, one person putting the filling in, another person cutting it, and another person. So I was part of that. And so all these are really fond memories as a child. And then later on, then the congregation was chosen to be used for the book department. So my dad was part of the book department. My mum was part of the book department. So I used to get involved with that, you know, and it was for a young child, that was all really exciting. I actually remember, you know, it was different back then. I mean, the assemblies nowadays are so different. I mean, you just go there and sit down and that's it. But back then we used to get involved in the preparation, involved in the book. I mean, I remember a friend of mine and his congregation, and I was always jealous of him because I was in the book room and his congregation were involved in moving garbage. And so after the sessions and that at lunchtime and stuff like that, he'd be on the back of this pickup truck driving through the concourse, jumping out and throwing bags of rubbish on the back of his truck. And I always think, oh, I wish I could do that, you know. But no, it was all, you know, we had some really nice times. And of course, the talks back then as well. I remember the talks. They were always very interesting talks. You know, I'll give you an example. This is just one example. We were listening to a talk in the meeting one day, and unbeknownst to myself and my mum or anybody else in the congregation, my dad and this other brother were at the back. They were dressed in sort of trench coats or whatever. And the person on the platform was giving a talk about persecution and what to expect. And halfway through the talk, my dad and this other brother marched up and literally picked him up off the platform and frog marched him off down and through the back doors. And it was all part of the talk. You know, it was about what to expect and always to be on guard. And I mean, there were sisters crying in the congregation, thinking that these two brothers, my dad and this other brother, had turned apostate. You know, but I mean, you can imagine. I mean, as a young child, I thought that was marvelous. You know, things like that happening. So yeah, I've got some really good fond memories of my early childhood. I don't really have any memories of the field service. I do remember the book studies, and I do remember one negative thing, I suppose, was I want to say that it was the Paradise Lost to Paradise Found. It was it a pink book? I think a big book, a pink one. I think it was.
Yeah, it was color. Paradise
Yeah,
Lost
and there
to
was
Paradise Regained. Yeah.
I remember studying that in the book study, and I do remember that infamous picture of that young girl, that little girl falling into a thing with a doll in her hand and fireballs coming out of heaven, and that frightened me to death, you know.
Right.
So yeah, nothing but fond memories of my early days coming into it with my mum and dad as a youngster. I've got some really good memories of that. And then when I was 10 years old, then back in 1976, my parents then moved to Wales. Up until that time, we were living in the Midlands, and we were in a pretty big city there. And like I said, the congregation was huge. And then we moved to Wales, and we went from that situation to being in a small hall. There's about 50 publishers. There was one other person my age, which I befriended. In fact, he was a year older than me. Well, there was two actually, but the other one I didn't really get on with. But and this was a congregation where they were either related to each other or they were close knit, you know, very close knit. And they didn't have the LPs, the records for the songs in this congregation. They used to have a sister who played the piano for the songs. So we went from one extreme to the other. We went, you know, so it was quite different. And of course, I had to change schools as well. And again, because we were coming down to Wales into a small area, I was the outsider coming in. And that was the only time, that was when I first started realizing that I was I was different. I was being looked at as the odd one out. At that point, I started getting teased for not celebrating Christmas and birthdays. And, you know, I was the new kid on the block. I had eye problems, which has been a problem with me all my life. And I was this JW weirdo, you know, that come into the school. And again, the same as the congregation in school. It was a very small area, so they were either related somewhere to each other, or they were, you know, very close knit, you know, sort of people there. And I just remember wanting to fit in. I remember wanting to be liked and wanting to be normal. And of course, because of my health problems with my eyes, because I was a JW, because I was a new kid, you know, I didn't fit in with them. And eventually I got involved with some bad kids and trying to prove myself to them. And I got involved with the police and all this sort of thing. So from about 10 years old, I started having problems. And the truth then started being a real hassle for me, because it was the cause of me being different as I saw it. You know, because people used to tease me about not having Christmas presents and birthday presents and things. So that was a really bad time for me. I didn't enjoy that at all. So, but up until that point, up until the time we moved to Wales, I think looking back and thinking about this, that was the time when things started to change for me. Was where, you know, moving into a smaller place with these people that were different and, you know, all very close, Steve, very cliquey.
Yeah, may I interrupt again? I'm seeing you as a child kind of smoothly being integrated into the Jehovah's Witness life, because your parents didn't become stricter. Like a lot of JW parents were very much encouraged, and I say that in air quotes, to basically beat their kids, to make them perfect little obedient Watchtower robot children. Most of the parents were beating their kids for any little thing. And I'm amazed and I'm happy that your parents seem to be very loving and supportive and didn't turn into strict, you know, taskmasters, and that you were in a congregation with a lot of people that were basically supportive of you. You were treated kindly, you were given praise, validation, you were supported, you were happy, there were parties, they had fun. They sounded like they were fun, happy people. And at 10 years old, that's a very tender age. 10 and 11 and 12 is very tender, because you're coming out of childhood and at the very beginning of turning into an adult, which is a very arduous process under best of circumstances. And all of a sudden, your entire world, your entire support system except for your parents, is ripped out from under you. You're in a strange place. You're in a kingdom hall with a minuscule amount of people compared to what you were used to. And they basically have their own little club, their own little clique, and you ain't in it. And you don't have the friends that you had. You don't have the association that you have. You don't. The most important need of a human, according to Dr. Phil, is to be accepted. People think it's to be loved. No, it's to be accepted. And all of a sudden, you're on the outside. You don't fit in. You don't know anybody. And if that isn't bad enough, you're also in a new school. And they're treating you with, being emotionally bullied, and you're very self-conscious because of your eye issue. So, I did the same thing. I had my Jehovah's Witness life, and I went off and did, was involved with not the best kids. But I understand it, and I feel for you. And this is what Watchtower does. They don't express love. They don't understand or seem to care or even be aware of the emotional trauma and damage that they can cause or be the cause to a child in your position. Please continue. I am really absorbed in your story.
Well, I think that, like I said, when we moved to Wales, I think because of the situation and things, I think it taught me to be two different people in school and amongst my peers in the world, so to speak. I had to be one person, this really tough exterior kid who didn't care, and then going to the meetings, I had to be this sweet kid and all the rest of it. And my parents were never totally hard on me. I mean, obviously they, if I got up to, I did do some pretty bad things. Well, not that bad, but I did some bad things, and of course I was punished for it. But I wasn't. They weren't taskmasters for the truth that I can remember. So it wasn't like that. But it was just the fact that I had this situation where I lived in two different worlds. On the one hand, I had to be this tough exterior kid who didn't give a damn about anything. But on the other hand, when I went to the meetings and that in my other life, I had to be this other person, and I had to try and sort of flick between two. I suppose I've become quite good then at sort of being two different people. It was like that. I kind of adapted in that way, and because I suppose I got mixed up with the wrong kids, I ended up, like I said, getting into trouble with the police and all this. Of course, that was obviously very distressing for my parents and things. And then if we fast forward then to, you remember that friend I told you about when I moved to Wales? Well, he was the only friend I had really in the truth, I'd call it the truth, you know what I mean? So when we moved into the congregation in Wales, this friend of mine, he was about a year older than me actually, but we hit it off really well. But I didn't know at the time. I was probably too young to understand. But he was messed up because he'd had some serious things happen to him. His father was an elder. I won't go into detail, but I mean, he wasn't treated very well. And so, we were the perfect storm, me and him together. We used to sort of lead each other onto these different things that we used to get up to. So it was quite hard actually. That time in my life was quite difficult. So anyway, we moved on from there. Then I was back to I fast forward now to when I was 15 years old in 1981. Incidentally, that was the last time I would ever see this friend again. My parents moved to I think you'd call it a homestead. We call it a small holding. It was a cottage with some land, and we had horses and goats and sheep and hens and all that sort of thing. But they moved inland about 40 miles or so, 35, 40 miles. So because of the logistics and the geography, it was very difficult for them to get to meetings. And so I think eventually they just kind of faded, or sort of they just, the truth grew cold in them, and they become, they didn't. I think my dad carried on for a little while going to meetings, but they were so far away that in the end they stopped going and they became inactive. And as a result, then I became inactive. But the interesting thing is that I was always mentally in, always, until when I woke up in 2019. But I was always mentally in. I wasn't always in physically, but I was always mentally in. of course, when they sort of became inactive, I just decided I didn't want it. I still believed it, but I couldn't live that way. And so I left home when I was 16 years old. I moved in with a girl when I was 17 years old. We had our first child when I was 18 years old. So there's a child having a child. And we lived together. Me and this girl lived together. And then what she knew about my history as a witness, I told her about it, you know. One day I come back from work and she said to me, "Oh, we've had your friends around here today." And I said, "What friends?" And she said, some Jehovah's Witnesses. I said, "What, you told them that I was a JW?" I said, "Yes." And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that." And she said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Because they won't leave me alone now. They'll just keep coming." And sure enough, they did. They found out when I wasn't working, and they kept coming around every week. But they were an absolutely lovely couple. They were from a different congregation to the other one that I was in. So eventually they started a study with me and my girlfriend. We weren't married, we were living together. And like I said, I was still mentally in. I still believed it was the truth. So we had this study, and I was messing around for about 6 months. But then at some point I thought to myself, well, you know, I know it's the truth, and I've got to sort myself out. I've got to do something about this. So I started taking it seriously then. And so did my girlfriend at the time. In fact, she became an unbaptized publisher like me. And then, of course, because we were living together and because I was taking things very seriously, we had to get married. So we got married. But then she dropped out completely. She all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, and I don't know to this day, she decided she didn't want it anymore. She became really opposed to it. And she used to taunt me for being an unbaptized publisher. I mean, she really did. I threw myself into it. And of course, the fact of the matter is that I was living in this, it was a social, I suppose you could call it like a social housing, a big estate of houses. And I used to have to walk through these houses to a car park where this couple would pick me up for the book study and for the meetings, you know, fully dressed in a suit. I mean, up until that point, you know, nobody had ever seen me in a suit before. And of course, they got to know what I was doing it for. So I used to get taunted terribly. My wife was really, my girlfriend who became my wife, she was really anti JW. And, you know, she tried everything to stop me going. In fact, I was just about to go through the door one day and she said, "I don't want you to go tonight." And I said, "Oh, I'm going. You know, it means a lot to me." And she disappeared into the kitchen. She came back and she cooked a meal, like, you know, potatoes and all that and gravy, whatever. She chucked it all over me. And I said, "Well, I hope you feel better." I said, "Because I'm still going." You know, I was that determined. And I walked with my dinner all over me. And I went to the group and, you know, and of course they were, I mean, that just fed into the persecution complex. That did completely. But then my wife stopped. We'd had kids. In the end, we'd had 3 kids together, and she'd stopped me seeing the kids. She had an affair. We got divorced, and yeah, it was like this big persecution thing. But I think it was in 1990 I got baptized. I was 24 years old. I got baptized, and I was gung ho for the truth at that time. I became a ministerial servant in 91, 92. In fact, the elder, he was an elder, the guy that came to, you know, that brought me in with his wife, he was an elder, and I became a ministerial servant, and I was a servant for about 3 or 4 months. And then he said to me, after about 3 or 4 months, he said to me, "You know, you'll be an elder within 3 to 5 years, don't you?" And I, you know, I was thinking, wow, I didn't expect that. So I was fully in. I was always indoctrinated into believing it was true anyway. But this time, I was doing everything I should be doing. You know, I was being persecuted. I'd lost my kids. You know, my wife had stopped me seeing them. So I was going through all that through the courts as well. That was a pretty rough time. And anyway, I got involved with a lad in the hall. He was about the same age as me, and me and him had the same personalities. and I'm not on about the good personality, I'm on about the bad personality. And we got chatting and we got together and we started going out and having a drink together. I remember one day everything was slipping again. The whole thing was slipping through my fingers again. And I remember one day he got an 18 rated movie, and I'll never forget, it was The Terminator, and he brought it over in the video. He said, "Oh, let's watch this movie," and I looked at it and I thought, if I watch this movie, there's no going back. You know, I was that convinced that by watching this movie, I was really snubbing Jehovah, you know. And it was like a turning point for me, as daft as it sounds now. Me watching that movie was me saying to Jehovah, I don't want you anymore. So that was that. And then it all went wrong again.
Steve,
yeah.
that sounds, I'm sorry, but that sounds extremely, not only extreme, but kind of crazy that you would think watching The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the first one in the series, was somehow snubbing Jehovah. I mean, that sounds really crazy to me. Is that the hold that this organization had on our mind, that we thought that somehow, what? Is that what you're telling me?
It was, yeah, I think that's what, well, I'm definitely telling you that's how I thought. But having said that, my personality, it's always been the same. It's either I'm all in or if I'm not all in and I'm not doing everything, then I might as well not be doing anything, because you're you're taught, aren't you, that, you know, if you watch violent movies, then, you know, you're kind of part of Satan's world. You enjoy violence. You enjoy things you shouldn't be enjoying. So to me, that was a turning point. To me, that was really snubbing Jehovah. And I thought, well, once I watched that movie, I knew that it was kind of like I'd given into the world. I'd given into Satan. And then I started drinking, and, you know, it all went wrong again then.
That must have been so hard for you emotionally, because it almost sounds like you have an addictive personality where you can get really sucked in, and if you deviate in any way from your dedication to whatever it is, you can be addicted to work, addicted to a religion, addicted to a club or a relationship. Then if something slips out of the way of out of the ordinary, control or whatever, it just kind of sends you off. Is that kind of what happened to you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I have got an addictive personality. And the way I used to see it was, you know, you're either in the truth and you're in it properly, or you're not. You know, if you're half-hearted, you're not in it. And that's how I saw it. It was as simple as that to me. So, you know, if by watching this movie, I was basically saying I don't want the truth anymore. It was that serious to me. To me, it was that serious. And of course, it all went downhill from there then, because I thought, well, if I've done that, I might as well go out and do whatever. I started drinking. We went to clubs. I started smoking. So that was, that's how it was. That's how it became for me at that time. And then again, I started thinking, because again, I still believed in it. I was always mentally in. Like I said, I might not have been with my heart and mind, but with my physically, I might not have always been there, but mentally, I was always in. And I often used to think to myself, you know, if I come home drunk or whatever, if I, you know, done something that was a gross sin, as they call it, I'd lay there at night and I'd be thinking to myself, I wonder how Jehovah feels about me now, you know. So that's how much it affects.
Steve, this sounds absolutely torturous. This sounds mentally and emotionally torturous for you, because it's bad enough if you have a tendency to be addictive. You know, like I said, it sounded like you have a little bit of an addictive personality. So Watchtower really, really uses that, manipulates that, because they make you feel like you're okay as long as you're, you know, running that little hamster wheel and you keep going and you don't lose momentum, then you're okay. But if you slip, now you're a failure. You've ruined everything. You've gone off the deep end, and you might as well do this and that because it doesn't matter. And I understand about being physically out and mentally in. I was the same way, wondering how Jehovah thought of me, and I'm feeling for you. Steve, please continue. Please forgive me for interrupting.
No, that's fine. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's how I do have an addictive personality. I always have had. So yeah, it was that simple to me. But the strange thing was, because I'd learned to live two lives, even though I was doing these crazy things, I'd still go to the odd meetings now and again, and I was still a ministerial servant on the books. I was still an MS. It wasn't until later on that you know, they took me off because I got disfellowshipped. What had happened was I decided to try and sort myself out again, and I started going back to the meetings and doing everything right again. I threw myself straight back in it, did everything genuinely. You know, my heart was in it. I was trying to do it right and everything else. At the same time, I met this other sister, and she wasn't, I wouldn't say she was strong in the truth, but she was in the truth, and she believed it. And we got married in 1993. We got married, and I was 27 years old, and still wasn't, although I was really making an effort, well, I wasn't still properly, fully doing everything I should be doing. Anyway, I lived in my own flat or apartment, and she came over. The only what do you call it when somebody's with you, watching over you when you're with somebody, chaperone. The only chaperone I had was this friend, so he wasn't much of a chaperone. I mean, anyway, we ended up committing fornication, but this was like a month before we were due to be married. I was devastated. I mean, my conscience was terrible, hurting me terribly, because I was still, we'd organised the wedding and everything. The wedding was being held at the Kingdom Hall. People were coming from all over the place for this wedding. I just couldn't bring it upon myself to confess, because it would have messed everything up. So my wife and I got married. You know, we went through with it, and after, when we came back from honeymoon, we went straight to the elders and said, look, you know, we've got something to tell you, and we told them, and we were both disfellowshipped. And that was that. We and of course we had to work ourselves back in again. It was a really strange time for me and for my ex-wife as well. We were reinstated in '94, and I got to be honest. I mean, you know, I was saying just now about the fact that I was all in or wasn't in. That's true, but at the same time, I was coming back, but I wasn't really coming back at this point. I wasn't coming back because I wanted to come back. I was coming back because I didn't want me or my wife to be disfellowshipped, because she had family members in, and you know, we had friends. I was just going back to get reinstated, so that, you know, to pacify everybody really. But I was still drinking. And I've got to be honest, for those first couple of years, I wasn't a good husband. I think I was trying to make up for lost time. I mean, I got involved with the girls so young and had kids so young that I kind of missed out on things as a youngster. So I was trying to make up for that. And anyway, we separated for about a year in '97. And again, I become inactive. And I got disfellowshipped again because I was smoking. And but I moved back in with her, though. I moved back in with my wife, and I was reinstated in about 2000. But again, I only did it so that it was just pacifying everybody, and it was making life a bit easier. But my heart still wasn't fully in then. And for the next 10 or 11 years, I was up and down. I was attending the meetings, and there'd be a week where I perhaps wouldn't go. Anyway, eventually in 2011, we'd had 3 kids. This was another 3 kids now. So I had 6 children there. So we had another 3 kids with this wife, and she ended up having an affair, and you know, so she got disfellowshipped, and then in 2011 we got divorced. She had every intention of coming back, and when we got divorced. And when that happened, I looked back at my life and I was thinking, I can't keep doing this. I've got to make the truth my own, and I've got to keep it that way. Because I sort of thought to myself, it's only when I left the truth that everything started going wrong. You know, I've got to get back in it again and start doing the right things. So I threw myself back into the truth. I pioneered for 2 years. I went to pioneer school. I was genuinely in, and I was genuinely really trying to do everything right. I became a very close friend with an elder, and that being a close friend to an elder, I'd been a ministerial servant, but I'd never been an elder, and I'd never really had much to do with elders apart from the judicial thing. But what I mean is, I'd never really been that close to elders in the past. The elder that I was close to in the beginning, the one that brought me in, he died in a car accident. So I didn't have much chance with him. But, I'd never really been that close to elders before. But this time he was my pioneer partner. We used to go out together, and we just hit it off, and we were very, very close. And that opened my eyes, because he used to, I had no inside information up until that point. I had no idea at all how things were done. But then this elder friend of mine, this pioneer partner and good friend, he used to tell me stuff that he shouldn't have told me, really. And I learned all sorts of things. I started to hear about the backbiting. I started to hear about the elders not liking each other. In fact, I'll give you an example. He told me that there was another elder in the congregation that decided he was going to spy on another elder, because this other elder was a regular pioneer, but he was never at the meetings for field service. So this elder decided he was going to literally spy on him, and he did. He literally spied on him. He'd park his car 100 yards away from his house, and he would make notes of when he went out, when he came in, because he didn't think that he was actually putting the hours in to be a pioneer. So I learned all about this backbiting, all about these elders not liking each other, spying on each other and all this. And then another example, he told me that another elder, he didn't tell me who it was, but he told me that, one of the elders in the congregation had a problem with pornography. There was a brother in the congregation that had been a ministerial servant for years, and they didn't like him. I remember having a conversation and saying, "Well, when's he going to be made up as an elder?" And and this elder friend of mine said, "Well, not on my watch." He said he's not made of the right stuff, or something like that. He said, not exactly the words, but they didn't like him basically, and they weren't about to make him up as an elder. So I started to learn all these things about the elders, and the way it was run. And it was a massive eye opener to me. I mean, I was really shocked, absolutely shocked. I thought it was Jehovah's organization, the Holy Spirit was involved. And all of a sudden I started learning about all these people that were these elders that were up to all sorts of crazy things. And it was just, it was hard for me to believe. I actually said to him, really? Are you serious? Are you telling me that? Yeah, he said, this is what happens. And then he told me about an experience that he'd had. Apparently the circuit overseer had sent him up 400 miles north to a congregation where there were only 2 elderly elders. And they sent him up there to help out. And these 2 elders had everything in the palm of their hand. And they didn't like him being in there, and they actually got him deleted off as being an elder. So he went up there to help the congregation, but these 2 elderly elders didn't like it, found a way to get him deleted, and he came back down here not being an elder. So, all this crazy stuff. And it wasn't what I was expecting. It just, it took me completely by surprise. And it made me realize, this is just men. This is just men that are at first I just thought, it's imperfect men, because that's what we're taught, isn't it? It's just imperfect men. But this was beyond that. This wasn't just imperfect men making a couple of little mistakes. This was, the stuff that these men were doing was they were disfellowshipping offences, a lot of them.
Wow.
So it was terrible, really. I remember one day I was in a car And there was this publisher that his wife had been in the truth for years, and he'd never really made the truth his own. He never got baptized, but he was starting to come to the meetings regularly, and he started answering her. And he actually became an unbaptized publisher. And I was in the car with him one day, and he said to me, he said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And I said, "You can ask it." I said, "I don't know if I'm going to tell you, but go ahead and ask." And he said, what makes you think it's the truth? What makes you absolutely sure that you've got the truth, that this is the truth? He said, "Because I want to be able to answer that question." And he said, "No, I'm trying to find the answer." He said, "Can you tell me how you know that it's the truth?" And that was a question I'd never been asked before, and it caught me completely off guard. And I sat there in the car, and I couldn't think of an answer. I just sort of said, well, in the end, I just sort of said, well, it's not just one thing. It's a number of things. The love amongst the. I was saying this, and I was thinking that, that's not true. But that was the standard answer, wasn't it? The love amongst the brothers, and it was the fact that the organisation was accomplishing so much throughout the world, and they were preaching the good news through all the world and all the rest of it. But actually, when I sat and thought about it later on, I come to the realization that actually I just adopted these beliefs from others. First of all, from my parents, and then later on, like from the organisation. They weren't my beliefs; they were adopted beliefs. They were beliefs that I'd adopted from other people. But having said that, it was, to me, it was the truth because of because of the things that the organisation was doing, and that was one of the. I'll come back to that in a little while, but that was one of the things that made me think that maybe God's still using them, even though they're imperfect. And I thought that my whole belief and my whole trust in the governing body's authority is based on one scripture, and that's on Matthew 24:45 through 47. My whole belief and trust in their authority is my accepting their interpretation of that scripture. And so I looked at it, and I looked at it in context, and I reread it and thought about it, and I thought, well, this isn't a prophecy. This is not a prophecy. So that was it, really. And my whole world was my whole belief had cracks in it, to say the least. And because, like I said, I might not have always been physically in, but I was always mentally in. And then at the same time, this elder friend of mine said that I'd be in the next circuit overseer's visit. The elders had had a meeting, and there was 12 elders in the congregation, and all of them had agreed that I should be put forward as a ministerial servant. I mean, this was like 5 or 6 years after I'd been divorced. And I'd really thrown myself in. I'd been a regular pioneer. I'd been a pioneer at school. I was doing everything right. And they put my name forward. They were all in total agreement. And right at the last minute, they had to write to my old congregation, which is where I had the trouble earlier, further on in the past. And they'd stopped it. And the reason they stopped it was because of the problems that they'd had with me like a decade earlier. And they didn't trust me. I mean, they didn't even know me now. I mean, I was a different person. And yet they stopped me from being a ministerial servant because they didn't trust that I was, legitimate. So everything was starting to cave in on itself. I started to become aware of people were leaving, and I'd be thinking, why on earth would anybody leave? They know it's the truth. Why would they leave? In particular, there was one elder. He'd come from the last congregation I was in, the congregation that stopped me from being an MS. He came on a visiting talk one day. He gave the talk, the public talk, and I said to him, I spoke to him after and all the rest of it, and I knew this brother. I remember him coming into the truth. I remember the problems that he had, to become a witness. He went through a lot to become a witness. You know, he went through an awful lot. A week later, after that public talk, I found out he'd left the truth, become an apostate. And I was gobsmacked. I was like, why? Why on earth would he do that? You know, and I'd often questioned why people, once they knew the truth, why would they stand outside assemblies with banners and say that, you know, and be apostate? Why? They know it's the truth. Why would they do that? They're siding with Satan. I couldn't understand it. And then I became aware of Raymond Franz. I read that book because I thought to myself, when I heard about Raymond Franz and that he was a governing body member and that he basically had a very comfortable life, he was as high as you could go, and then all of a sudden he left it to live in a trailer. And I was, there's got to be a reason. That's not just because, you know, there's got to be a reason for that. And that's when I read Crisis of Conscience, because I thought there's got to be a reason for that. People don't just leave, not especially when they're that high up. They've got a comfortable life. Yeah.
So when that young brother, unbaptized publisher, asked you in the car, how do you know it's the truth, the organization? You know, it's almost like the saying goes, in order to plant a seed, you have to disturb the soil. I did the same thing as you. You're telling my life story exactly the way you're telling it. It's exactly what happened to me. I would see people leaving what I call the truth, and I'm thinking, how could you know Jehovah? How could you come to know the truth? How could you come to know Jehovah and then walk away and go side with Satan? Have they lost their mind? But you actually became a PIMQ. You became a person who was in, but mentally, you started questioning, why would these people leave? And you allowed yourself to start looking for answers. And I just want to highlight that, because there are so many in the organization today, and so many in the organization who might listen to your story tomorrow, who will get to the point or have gotten to the point where they just can't continue to swallow down things that concern them, that bother them, questions. They can't keep saying, well, Jehovah will take care of it. They're just imperfect men. You know, I can't let Satan take over my mind and doubt Jehovah. You know, all those implanted excuses. But you became a PIMQ. You were mentally, you know, you're physically in, you're doing everything, but mentally, you're not just taking it and just assuming and taking everything for granted. It's the truth. I have the truth. I'm in Jehovah's organization. You're questioning why, that nice little 3-letter word. Thank you. Steve, we're going to have to, you know, wrap it up. I don't know, but
we've got, Anne-Marie,
this.
this is Rick coming in here. We got a great story going. We got a whole lot of people coming in here.
Absolutely.
We got a whole lot of people
Thank
coming
you,
in
Rick.
here. We're going to keep the ball rolling on this one. So, well, let's keep it going for another 15 minutes or so at least, and we'll check in, okay?
Oh, Rick, thank you so much. Yeah, Steve, did you hear what Rick said? Because I am like completely hanging on every word you said, and I didn't want to say anything about the time. So please continue. Forgive me for interrupting. You were questioning. You read Ray Franz's book, and you were like, well, he was on the governing body. Why did he leave to go live in a trailer? Please continue.
Yeah, I suppose I didn't really start questioning. It was I did, but it wasn't me that initiated the questioning. It was the fact that I was beginning to learn all these things about the infighting with the elders, people leaving for no apparent reason, and that was what caused me then to start thinking, well, you know, why? And that's when I started researching. I read Crisis of Conscience. I started researching. I found out about the United Nations connections. I went on to find out about the Jimmy Swaggart thing, about the free literature distribution, because we were told, you know, that, it's a wonderful thing that Jehovah's given, and it wasn't. It was just to get over paying tax or whatever it was. And Jimmy Swaggart was the court case that was going on, and they were siding with him. So I started to research the history. I heard a really good talk as well by a guy called Peter Gregerson, who was the person that Raymond Franz was seen eating with. It was his boss, Peter Gregerson. And there's a really good talk on YouTube that he gave about how he came to realize it wasn't the truth. I mean, he'd been in for about 50 years, I think, if my memory serves. And that was all about the so-called inspection that Jesus made in 1919, and the crazy things that were being taught as truth at that time. That's worth listening to if nobody's heard that. Peter Gregerson, it's a good talk to listen to. So anyway, I started becoming aware then of the deceit and the way they worded things. I've mentioned this before in comments. The way that the society words things, it's very deceitful, and I became aware of that, you know. But the biggest thing for me, I think the stumbling block for me to sort of wrap it up and think this is not the truth. The thing that prevented me from that was the fact that they'd accomplished so much. They were building things all over the world. Kingdom walls were going up all over the place. The good news have been translated in hundreds of languages. And I thought to myself, surely that's got to count for something. Surely maybe Jehovah is still using them because they've done an awful lot. And I had to look into that, and that was the thing that I had to look into. And of course, if you look at a lot of the videos and things on jw.org, they talk about these large projects and these large buildings and things that they've done, and these huge complexes that they're built for the organization. That they say that that's a sign that Jehovah is backing them. Well, in fact, they go one step further than that. They say that it's only possible to accomplish these great things without his help. It wouldn't be possible. We've all heard that. And of course, if you ask a Jehovah's Witnesses how they know they've got the truth or the right religion, they'll often repeat, you know, what they've been told, that you know, that the only organization on earth that are spreading the good news in such a large way and in hundreds of languages. And of course, there's no doubt, you know, they have accomplished a lot of amazing things and impressive works. They do, and they have done. But they're quick to use these accomplishments as evidence that they alone are the true Christians. So I looked into that and I thought, well, does that really signify that they've got God's approval? And I needed to solve that for myself. And I found that actually the opposite is true. That accomplishing great things and attributing its success to God was actually part of the sign of the last days. In fact, not just that, but it was an identifying mark of false prophets or false Christians. Because Jesus repeatedly warned his followers to look out for them, you know, to false Christ, so as not to be misled by them. In Matthew 24, he mentions it 3 times. And after the second time, he mentioned it a third time, but this time he showed how to identify them. Because in verse 24 of Matthew chapter 24, it says, "For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will perform great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the chosen ones." And then previously on the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name?" And of course, the Watchtower's done that. "Do we not expel demons in your name?" Well, of course, we know about that in the first century. And perform many powerful works in your name. And that was a warning. You know, people that claim that this, you know, that they've got God's help. But of course, if you tie that up with something that Paul said in the 2 Thessalonians, Paul told them not to be quickly shaken from their reason concerning the presence of Jesus by being alarmed by an inspired statement or by a spoken message to the effect that the day of Jehovah is here. How often have we heard that from the Watchtower? It's just around the corner. And then he went on to say to them that these things were the lawless ones and that their presence is by the operation of Satan with every powerful work and lying signs and wonders. So to me, and just to put the final nail in the coffin, really, Jesus said in Luke 21 verse 8, he said that, "Look out that you're not misled, for many will come on the basis of my name, saying, I am he, and the due time is near." I mean, how many times have we? And he said, "Do not go after them." So people who are spreading this thing, doing all these accomplishments and saying, the due time is near, Jesus said, don't go after them. That's Jesus talking. Do not go after them. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the Bible itself identifies them as being false prophets. And of course, they try to get out of this, don't they? They try and say, well, we're not prophets. We've never said that we're prophets, but they have. They have said, they've said it in the past.
They had a watchtower, and the title of the article that I remember was, "They shall know that a prophet was among them." And it was all about them praising themselves for being a prophet of Jehovah. And then later, how many years later, oh, we never said that. We never taught that. They lie. Steve, I am so impressed with your testimony, and I appreciate your bringing out that one of the first signs, in fact, it was the first sign, when we would read at the door the signs of the last day, we would always start with the scripture that says, "For nation will rise against nation," and blah, blah, blah. But they always skip the first sign, that many will rise up and mislead many, even the elect. And what people don't get is they're talking about misleading those who came to know Christ. Salvation through Christ, God's plan of salvation through Jesus Christ. And Watchtower always turned everybody away and said, no, don't listen to John 14:6. That's not the way. When Jesus said, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, Watchtower doesn't teach that. Watchtower says, no, we're the only way to get right with God. We're the truth. We're the only way you can have a chance to have life. And as far as Matthew 24, and verse 45 and 47, you know what Watchtower never reads is verse 48, where Jesus identifies that faithful slave. He identifies the faithful slave even in the New World Translation, verse 48 of Matthew 24. Jesus said, but if ever that evil slave says in his heart, my master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves, that is Jesus identifying the faithful, discreet slave as actually being an evil slave. And that's even in the New World Translation, and nobody ever seems to connect that.
No, that's right.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the same with that scripture I mentioned in Luke, where Jesus said, you know, that people will say the time is now. Do not go after them. That's Jesus saying, don't go after people. He says the time's now. And just for the listeners' information, if there's anybody that wants to look at the Watchtower where they said that they were prophets, it's the Watchtower, April 1st, 1972, page 197, paragraphs 3 to 5. And it's entitled, They Shall Know That a Prophet Was Among Them. And it identifies Jehovah's Witnesses as prophets. So if the Watchtower says, we have never said that we're prophets, they either don't know or they just completely lying, because they did. It was in that Watchtower in black and white. So,
Steve,
like
I'm so happy you brought that. I could not remember. I just remember they did say it. I can't thank you enough. I'm writing it down. Sorry, go ahead.
It's April 1st, 1972, page 197, paragraphs 3 to 5. And they there say they identify themselves as prophets. The Jehovah's people are prophets, the modern day prophets. And so it's there in black and white. And like I said before, they're very good with words. The Bible clearly says you must have leaders amongst you. So they just change the wording around. People taking the lead. Well, who's a person taking the lead? He's a leader. That's the same thing. It's just the words are turned around. It's all syntax and grammar. It's just, they twist words. They're very, very deceitful.
Yes, they are master word manipulators, and they are masters at saying what they're saying without sometimes saying what they're saying. So you get, like, they never say, you left Jehovah, or you're strong at, you know, they don't say the Watchtower. I'm sorry. If somebody left the Watchtower, they say they left Jehovah. They don't say come back to the Watchtower. They say come back to Jehovah. But they equate Watchtower, serving Watchtower, believing in Watchtower, promoting Watchtower, never questioning Watchtower, being absolutely loyal to Watchtower, with that being loyal and respectful and obeying and being loyal to God. That is the programming. Steve, I am so amazed. We are pretty much out of time. And I want to know if there are any main thought you want to leave your audience with. And then if we have time, maybe we can take one or two questions. Do you have one thing you want to leave with the audience?
If anybody is worried about, thinking that they're being misled by Satan by wanting to look through and do research, just remember that that's not what the Bible says. The Bible commends people who double check things. We all know about the Bereans, and they were more noble-minded, because they checked to make sure these things were true. At the end of the day, just think logically. Jesus Christ, as you've mentioned, is the way, the truth, and the life. Well, they blaspheme that because they put themselves in front of Jesus. And they say, no, we are the way to Jesus. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said as plainly as you can put it, I am the way. No, not you can't. You've got to go through a third party to get to me. In fact, they're making themselves the mediators between men and Jesus. And what they're doing by doing that, and their doctrine is that they're taking away Jesus' mediatorship and messiahship from people, because the majority of people are of the great crowd, as they call it, and they're not covered by Jesus. And they give up, they snub Jesus at the memorial by not partaking. They do not accept Jesus, and they should be. It's all there in the Bible. But what they're doing is that people are allowing themselves to adopt other people's interpretation of the scriptures. And when we stand before Christ, and when we're judged, and Jesus says to us, "Why did you do that, Steve?" And I turn around and say, "Because they told me to," we wouldn't accept that explanation from our kids.
No, we wouldn't. And
Jesus gave us our mind, he gave us the Holy Spirit, and he gave us a conscience, and he gave us the Bible. That's all we need. That's not to say we can't, learn from other people. We just had a wonderful explanation of Revelation. But, at the same time, we can't just go on what other people say. It's our obligation as human beings to make sure that what we're being told is right. So for anybody that's worried about checking up on things, don't be. It's your obligation to do it. It's your God-given obligation to do it. That's it, really.
that is awesome. I just, I appreciate that you brought up the memorial. I never knew that making the memorial the most important night of the year, they are coming together basically for a satanic ritual to actually take the representation of Jesus' blood, take it in their hand, look at it, and pass it up, and do the same thing with the bread representing his body. Is the worst blasphemy. It is like spitting on the dying body of Christ on the cross. But I just want to encourage everyone who still only trusts in the New World Translation, read it in any Bible, John chapter 6, beginning in maybe verse 37, and read to the end, because Jesus takes a long time very carefully explaining who he is, that he's the bread of life that came down from heaven. And he said very, very emphatically in many ways, you must drink of my blood and eat of my flesh, or you have no life in you. And it's in the New World Translation. Watchtower never considers those scriptures. Thank you so much, Steve. We might have time for one question. We've couple minutes over time. Anybody have one question real quick that they want to ask Steve, or a comment, *6?
Well, I'll just come in here, Anne-Marie, and be the icebreaker. I'll go ahead, Michael. Go ahead, Michael King.
Oh, yeah. How you doing? Yeah, I just wanted to let you know, Steve, that one of the questions I always ask my elder friend is about, he says, we're the only people that preach. Well, that's not true. I've been in churches where they have organized, they go door to door too, just like the witnesses. And they have missionaries all over the world. So that's not even true at all.
No, it's not. And there's not just one way to preach. I mean, preaching from door to door isn't the only way to preach. I mean,
That's
people
great.
have been preaching for centuries, you know. So that's just a term that they've kind of adopted for themselves, I think.
Yeah, I've told my elder friend that I said I'll contact 500 more people today than you will all week. Yeah. And you know, so that just like you said, there's other ways to preach and spread the gospel. The other misnomer, they say they're the only one that uses Jehovah's name. Well, I've been in churches where they know all 26 of Jehovah's names. So I mean, Yahweh and Jehovah Jireh. I mean, I've been in churches where they teach all that. So that's not true either.
No.
Yeah.
But I think, just to add to that though, I think that with any lie that's going to be, not the word good is the wrong word, I can't think, something that's going to work well, a lie that's going to work well has got to have a kernel of truth in it. And I don't think that every single thing that the Watchtower says is wrong. I think there are some truths in what they say, but it's just a kernel of truth, and the lie is built around that kernel of truth. Personally, that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, I enjoyed listening to your story. You made a comment a couple of weeks ago when people were telling their stories, and you would say, I think you said the comment that these are real people. These are real people that the witnesses are affected. I don't know if you remember saying that or not, but that really touched my heart when you said that. Yeah, these are real people that's happening to. So, well, thank you for coming on. Keep telling your story.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. One last comment for those who are questioning, physically and mentally questioning. What Steve was saying is it is not wrong or against Jehovah God to investigate what Watchtower teaches. Use the Bible. He brought up April 1st, 1972, Watchtower as an example. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says, make sure of all things. Paul praised the Bereans for checking out the scriptures as to whether these things were so. Hebrews 5:14 says that we should have our perceptive powers trained through use. This does not tell us to just be brainless and just think whatever you're told to think. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming in. I'm sorry to cut this incredibly wonderful show. Steve, thank you. I cannot thank you so much. I am going to listen to your story, but we need to go to JW World News. We're running late. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day. Rick?
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie and Steve. That was wonderful, Steve. Man, you were really put through the grinder with the Watchtower, and thank you for coming on and giving your story today. Really appreciate it. Great story. Thank you, Steve. Well, we are now going to JW World News. I'll tell you what, this is a great afternoon. We're having a lot of fun here. And I just want to say what's coming up. We have more programs coming up here on the 6 screens. We've got JW World News coming up next. And then, of course, at 4 o'clock, we go to the Christian Court. Now, if you haven't listened into the Christian Court, it's a very fascinating program. We ask, we get into some various thoughts on Christianity. And I know that if you guys listen in, you're going to really be surprised. For example, some of the thoughts that are going to come up with the scholars are going to be answering today on the Christian Court. We have an Old Testament scholar and a New Testament scholar. How about Christmas trees? Well, we're in that season. Is it proper for a Christian to take and decorate a tree with gold and silver? I mean, the Bible says things about this. Well, how are we going to handle it? Also, how about wearing a cross? Is that really a form of idolatry? Well, we got the 2 scholars. They'll be answering those questions today. So by all means, stay with us. And I know you'll find it very, very fascinating. Also, we've got coming up at 5 o'clock, we have Jay Hess. He's going to answer your Bible questions. So don't run off on Jay. He'd love to have you come in and ask him a Bible question today at 5 o'clock. So let's go now. Let's get this platform off, and we're going to be going to the new platform. So let me just make sure we're doing this proper. All right, we're leaving this. Friends, stay with us if you're on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be right back on in just a couple of minutes.